Now, let me be very clear from the start, right? South Africa is many things: a democracy, a refuge, a continental leader. But what we are not is a training ground for foreign wars. And yet, that is exact question now hanging over this very country after the discovery of Libyan fighters training at a camp right here on South African soil. 95 men, military drills, fake study visas, a private security company, and a silence that raises more question than answers. Now, the South African authorities have detained 95 Libyan nationals in Mpumalanga, and apparently they entered the country on study visas, but they weren't studying anything. They weren't studying engineering, they weren't studying medicine, they were undergoing military training. The company running the camp has since been suspended, the men were deported, and charges were dropped. But the real danger is this, right? The questions were never answered. Libya is not a normal country. We all know that. Libya is a failed state, fractured by militaries and competing governments. And as security analysis put it very plainly, the Tripoli-based government of national unity controls less than 20% of the country. So the question becomes unavoidable, right? Who sent these men to South Africa? Because depending on the answer, this isn't just embarrassing, but it's quite explosive. Now, Libya's recognized government denies any involvement, but multiple reports link these fighters to Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar, who is a warlord backed by the foreign powers and mercenary groups, including Russia's Wagner network. And according to the reports, right, the men are allegedly tied to Tariq bin Ziyad Brigade, which is a group that has been accused by Amnesty International of severe human rights abuses. Now, let's pause here for a minute, because South Africans know what militarized violence does to civilian life. We know what it means when armed men treat communities like disposable terror, right? So when locals near White River report fear and intimidation and criminal activity, I believe that is not paranoia, but that is lived experience speaking. And one resident put it quite plainly. He said, and I quote, "Knowing that the people who frequent our village are soldiers in training made us scared." Now, that fear is quite important, and I believe it matters, because it's always working class Black communities who absorb the risk when powerful men play geopolitical chess, right? It is never like the suburbs. It's never Sandton, it's never Cape Town, it's never diplomatic suburbs. It's always like the rural towns, it's always the forgotten villages. It's a pattern that we have seen. And I think the question on everybody's mind right now is, why South Africa? Why not train in Europe? Why not Asia, right? Why not North America, for crying out loud? Because Africa is still seen by some as an open terrain, and that's just the truth, right? Because, for one, it's loosely monitored, it's politically cautious, and we are too polite to push back. And people know this. And that mindset, I believe, is colonial, and it's quite dangerous. Now, the analysts are warning that this may signal preparations for another major offensive in Libya. Haftar tried to take Tripoli in 2019 and failed. And now armed groups are mobilizing again. And if conflict erupts again, it won't stay in Libya, and we are aware of that. African instability never does, right? And South Africa must ask itself, are we unwillingly being pulled into someone else's war here? Because this is the deeper issue, right? African nations are constantly told to respect borders, to respect laws and international norms. But when it suits powerful actors, those same norms are quietly ignored. The foreign fighters, the private military companies, the shadow networks, all operating in the gray areas and the green zones of weak accountability. And that's not partnership, but that's exploitation at its best. So here are the questions I believe we must ask very loudly also is who approved the visas? Who vetted this company? And who knew and when? And how many other facilities exist that we don't know about? Because deportation without answers is not resolution, unfortunately, it's avoidance. And as Black South Africans, I say this with clarity and care, right? We stand with African people, including Libyans, but not with warlords. And we support peace and not proxy battles. And we reject the idea that African soil is available for rent to the highest bidder with a gun. Solidarity does not mean silence here. Pan-Africanism does not mean negligence. South Africa needs the following. We need stronger oversight of private security firms. We need transparent visa vetting. We have been saying this for years. And we also need the political courage to say no, even when it's uncomfortable. Because sovereignty is meaningless if anyone can just smuggle a war into our backyard. This moment is a warning, not just about Libya, but about how Africa is still being treated in the global power gains. And the choice, I believe, before South Africa is quite simple. Do we remain passive hosts to other people's violence, or do we finally assert that our land is not a battlefield for foreign ambitions? Us versus them doesn't mean hostility. It means boundaries. And this is one boundary I believe we cannot, absolutely cannot afford to just blur out. Let's continue the conversation in the comment section. I do want to hear your thoughts on this. And while you're at it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. That's it from me. Till we meet again, it is bye-bye for now.